Welcome back, all Chengyu and China history lovers. Laszlo Montgomery here for the 9th time this season with one more Chinese saying for your collezione. I'm guessing most Chinese speakers have at least heard of this one. Lǎo Mǎ Shí Tú. The old horse recognizes the way. That's what those 4 characters say, but that's not necessarily what they mean. So once again, to get the backstory, we'll have to turn to the great ancient and medieval classics from all the superstars of their day and locate our copy of the Han Feizi and take that one off the shelf to get the story behind these 4 characters. But before we do that, let's see what these 4 characters actually mean. A Lǎo Mǎ is an old horse. Yeah, this is another Chinese saying with a horse. 2nd time this season. Tu shi means to know or to recognize. This character comes in a 2nd and 4th tone version. I'm not sure why, but all my Chengyu books assure me. In this case, it's 2nd tone. And a tu is a road or route or a way. And you line these characters up in a row and they say, old horse recognizes the way. Simple enough. But let's go to the story and the meaning. Now let me first mention this one co-stars someone so esteemed, so sacred and important in ancient Chinese history and culture. Even the great sage himself, Confucius, he had said of this man, quote, "Had it not been for Guǎn Zhòng, we would all be wearing our hair loose and our robes folded on the left," end quote. Yeah, Confucius pointed to this person and said, thanks to Guǎn Zhòng's reforms, all of those future generations would now enjoy an orderly and harmonious society. Guǎn Zhòng was an advisor to the most consequential of rulers to govern the state of Qí, and this was Duke Huán. And this story takes place in Yan State, today basically the Beijing municipality area. Way before Beijing became Beijing, first it was the state of Yan. In the Yan mountain range in today's Hebei and Beijing area, there were 2 small kingdoms, Lìngzhī and Gūzhú. The ancient Lìngzhī state was situated just west of Tangshan in fabulous Hebei province, and Gūzhú was located next door and stretched east to the Bohai Sea. And these mountain people, who originally inhabited those 2 states, were an ancient ethnic group called the Shanrong. And these 2 ancient territories that could trace their history all the way back to the Shang dynasty were well protected by the impenetrable forests and twisting valleys of the Yan Mountains. Outsiders often referred to these 2 places as the Mountain Kingdoms. For decades, the Mountain Kingdoms had been coordinating attacks on their larger neighbors who bordered their lands. And this was back in the 7th century BC, so given the state of technology and engineering, these rulers of Lìngzhī and Gūzhú, they felt secure in knowing that their own home bases were all but immune to counterattack. But in the spring of 663 BC, when the famous Duke Huán of Qí received word from the Duke of Yan that the mountain kingdoms had once again invaded Yan, well, he decided he had had enough of that. He declared that he would personally lead a Qí force into Yan territory to help Yan defeat their antagonizers. So he set out from Qí, and among his retinue was none other than the very Guǎn Zhòng I just told you about. Duke Huán led the combined Qí and Yan armies on a successful campaign against the mountain kingdom of Lìngzhī, and his forces utterly destroyed them. The shattered remnants of the Lìngzhī army, along with the Duke of Lìngzhī, were forced to retreat into the lands of the other mountain kingdom of Gūzhú. They made their way to the palace, and this defeated Duke of the now former Lìngzhī begged for Gūzhú's help. The Duke of Gūzhú knew, with Lìngzhī knocked out, the mountain kingdoms were now quite vulnerable, and he knew, left to his own devices, it was doubtful he'd be able to continue to keep the Qí and Yan armies out of the Yan mountains. At this point, one of the Duke of Gūzhú's advisors told him there was no way he could defeat the Qí and Yan armies. They told him he should consider parleying with Qí and Yan and try to work something out. Another advisor chimed in and said that, in addition to cutting the best deal for themselves, they should also offer to execute the Duke of Lìngzhī, who as I said, was now a refugee in Gūzhú, the advisor said if they offered to bring them the head of the Duke of Lìngzhī, it might soften them up a little and, demonstrate Gūzhú's sincerity. The Duke of Gūzhú thought about this. Killing the Duke of Lìngzhī was no problem, but he wasn't quite ready to admit defeat yet. He replied to his advisors, "Our small army might put us at a disadvantage, but you underestimate the topography of our Yān mountain range. This terrain gives us a fighting chance against Qí and Yān." So after discussing the matter at length with his advisors, they came up with this plan. One of his chief advisors, a man named Huang Hua, was instructed to go to the Qí and Yān armies and pretend to be a defector from Gūzhú. He was to say that Gūzhú was in complete disarray with the whole kingdom and all its people wanting to make peace with Qí and Yān. And to embellish the story, Huang Hua was to mention how the Duke of Gūzhú was refusing to admit defeat. Huang Hua was to beg Qí and Yān to lead their armies to Gūzhú and to get rid of the unpopular monarch. And most important of all, Huang Hua had to offer to act as their guide. But this was all a ploy to lead the armies of Qí and Yān astray in the Yān mountains, where they would undoubtedly get hopelessly lost and disorganized. And to give strength to his false story, the Duke of Gūzhú had the Duke of Lìngzhī executed anyway and gave his head to Huang Hua as a token of peace. With the Duke of Lìngzhī's head in hand, Huang Hua hurried to the Qí and Yān army camps, where he told his story and it was immediately believed. So the combined armies of Qí and Yān fell into line at once and followed Huang Hua, who led them deeper and deeper into the Yān mountains, pretending to be taking them to Gūzhú. But one morning, Duke Huán of Qí woke up to discover two things. Firstly, Huang Hua had pulled a moonlight flitting, and secondly, that he and his army were now hopelessly lost somewhere in the Yān mountains. Now their highest objective was to find their way out of the mountains and back to Qí, but try as they might, the army could not navigate its way out. They had come to invade the mountain kingdoms in spring, and now it was winter, and thick snow covered the terrain, and it looked completely different from when they had first come. Well, just as the army was getting truly despondent, Duke Huán's advisor, Guǎn Zhòng, spoke up. He said, "Your Highness, may I make a suggestion? It's my belief that perhaps the old horses can be of some use to us in our predicament." Duke Huán listened to Guǎn Zhòng's plan and agreed at once. Thereupon Guǎn Zhòng ordered the soldiers to choose the oldest horses in the army and to unbridle them and allow them to walk free. The most senior among the horses at that desperate hour sniffed the air, looked around, and started walking. And the soldiers were instructed to follow the old horses. And sure enough, they began setting a steady pace without wavering, and the old horses led the army southward, out of the mountains, and back to their pleasant home in Qí. And when the Duke of Qí reached the edge of the mountain range and first saw the plain before him, he knew he had dodged this bullet. And he further knew, as Han Feizi said in his classic eponymous work, Lǎo Mǎ Shí Tú, the old horse knows the way. And if you were wondering whatever happened to Gūzhú, well, for their treachery, leading Duke Huán and the forces he led astray to perish in the Yān mountains, well, Duke Huán went back a few years later in 660 BC and put an end to their perfect little world, and that was the end of the Gūzhú state. So, Lǎo Mǎ Shí Tú, the old horse knows the way. It's a metaphor to describe experienced people who are familiar with all kinds of life situations and can be called upon in times of need to play a guiding role. It doesn't matter what kind of metaphorical old horse it is. Someone in your community, a retired senior executive who knows how to pull companies back from the brink, an old government official, anyone who has been around the block a few times and has a lot of experience in a particular field or activity. Lǎo Mǎ Shí Tú, this old horse, knows the best way to approach and navigate through some crisis or life situation successfully. Sometimes there's no substitute for experience. When you find yourself or your company up the creek without a paddle, remember Lǎo Mǎ Shí Tú. Sometimes that old horse will come to the rescue and lead you to victory or help you achieve your aim. Okay, Lǎo Mǎ Shí Tú. Next time you get lost in the mountains, you may want to keep that one handy. Now, she's too young to be an old horse, but Emma sure knows how to lead the pack over at the Chengyu Yanqiu Zhongxin, now fully operational in a very pricey location in Beijing. Thanks again, Emma. By the way, you may want to put this in your calendars. Emma's making her worldwide debut on the CSP sometime in May of this rabbit year. Something to look forward to rather than the same old meatloaf you get every time. All right, that's all I got for you. Sorry I can't drag this one out any longer. This is Laszlo Montgomery signing off on a lovely spring day here in Los Angeles, imploring you to come back next time for another exciting episode of the Chinese Sayings Podcast.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.